We're joined by Tymofiy Milovanov, a former Ukrainian Minister of Economy and the president of the Kyiv School of Economics. Thanks for being with us here from Switzerland. So really appreciate you joining. Now, first of all, some $750 billion being pledged to rebuild Ukraine. It's a massive sum already being put on the table. Does it seem like something is imminent? Will it be happening soon?
Well, we'll see. The key, I think, is for the international partners, for the international community and the IFIs to get a coordination mechanism, some kind of joint body. There's been a lot of talk about this body, but depending on how it's structured, it will be more or less effective.
Now, this conference in Switzerland, I mean, it seems like a nice affair, but it was actually planned, I believe, long before the war and was actually set to focus on reforms in Ukraine, corruption issues. Does all of this seem now less urgent than it was before the war?
This is an annual conference which has been going on since 2014, and it has always focused on reforms. The last year, the conference was in the Baltics, and there also was a discussion of the reforms. The issue of corruption in particular was raised, not only corruption, but also lobbyism and vested interest, both in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. During the reconstruction was addressed directly multiple times there. Clearly, everyone wants to have a governance mechanism so that during the procurement, mistakes of Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on, and also Ukrainian issues will not be repeated.
I mean, I understand President Zelensky talking about over 2,000 villages and towns right now, either fully under Russian control, the country flattened at this point. How can a country like this truly rebuild? Are we looking at a decades-long process?
Yes, and the situation is very dynamic because 2,000 villages are under control of the Russians, but at the same time, 1,000 has been brought back under Ukrainian control. So it's very fluid in the east and also in the north and the south. And the question, how can you rebuild during this process? That was discussed yesterday also hands-on, and there is an agreement or understanding that the war might go on for a long time, and therefore some of the recovery effort, better framed as resilience effort, has to be happening now. But overall, you're correct. We're talking about decades.
And are we talking about actually starting a process of rebuilding structures already, or does it have to be a ceasefire of some kind, or some kind of resolution to the firing before any real construction could begin?
Well, people have to live in houses, and if shelter is destroyed, something has to be put in place instead. Similarly, if bridges, river crossings are all destroyed, some of this needs to be rebuilt. And yesterday, the Minister of Infrastructure, Kubrakov, was talking about how much progress they have been able to make already, especially in the Kyiv region and Bucha and other places.
Now, I'm sorry to put it this way, but at this point, is there anything that's untouched from the war? I mean, are we talking about just mass destruction, the infrastructure, transportation? You mentioned bridges, buildings. I mean, has virtually everything been affected?
That's correct. Every industry has been touched. Every kind of building, you would think. It looks sometimes that the war is waged on schools because, there are 1,100 schools and universities that have been affected. It's unbelievable, and it's also across the country. So it's massive. We lost around 5 to 7% of residential housing so far. So it's just staggering.
It is staggering. It's a good word for it. It's hard to wrap our heads around. And we're talking about a wide country, big area here of Ukraine. Destruction and ongoing here. But at a broader level here, how are Ukrainians at large? How are they faring? How are they feeling at this point? Is there a sense of optimism that the war has been more or less pushed to the east, that the country's collapse has been staved off? Or is it a sense of pessimism, still mired in the mud, still stuck in the mud of the eastern conflict?
Well, it's a dynamic, as you can expect during the war, depending on the news coming from the front lines. If we lose territory, the mood goes down a little bit. If we resist successfully, then the mood is more optimistic. It's amazing that the service economy has not collapsed. In fact, the economy is functioning. That's really, really amazing. But at the same time, I think people are concerned what will happen in the winter and how to improve the situation with the port so that the economy can continue to export. This is serious challenges. Ukraine is coping so far, but it requires fundamental and massive support.
And are people coming home? You mentioned they need a place to live. I'm not sure they have it, but are many of those millions who fled, are they starting to come home at this point, starting to rebuild that local economy yet?
Yeah, some are coming back, and paradoxically, sometimes the lines on the border crossings in Ukraine are larger than the lines outside.
Wow.
But again, every time you get a missile attack, then people might be reconsidering this decision. So it's very, very fluid.
And in terms of the East now, we're looking at Donbass. We just had this report that Russia touting its gains, solidifying its hold there. Are there weapons coming in? Is there still a strategy by Ukraine to push back into these eastern territories? If you can comment on that.
Yes, so the weapons have been coming in, especially recently. They've been longer-range artillery and rocket systems, including HIMARS. And just yesterday, I think about 5 or more supply bases with ammunition in deep rare territory of Russian front have been targeted. So that's been making an impact. But let's see if it's sustained. That impact.
And another sort of economic angle here. What about the topics of EU extension? NATO, and where do these issues seem to lie? Are they critical right now in terms of recovering for Ukraine?
Okay, so the NATO has not been on the table, and whoever has been talking about this is just politics, because since 2014, Ukraine was a part of the conflict, so no one is going to bring in the country actively in war. But on the EU, yes, the EU candidacy has been granted, and there's a number of conditions and reforms that have to be fulfilled, and it's going to be a major political gravitational pull for Ukraine to become aligned with the EU.
Yeah, certainly a big deal for Ukraine that would be. But Tymofiy Milovanov, thanks for being with us from Switzerland. Good luck with the rest of the conference there.
Thank you.